ASEAN and partners reaffirm commitment on climate action. And also, Trump warns Russia to end war in Ukraine or face massive sanctions. Good afternoon and salam Malaysia Madani. This is World Today. ASEAN and its dialogue partners have reaffirmed their strong commitment to advancing regional and cooperation on climate action, environmental sustainability and disaster resilience. Now, this is in line with Malaysia's chairmanship theme of inclusivity and sustainability. The shared commitment was underscored in the ASEAN Chairman's statement issued following the ASEAN Post-Ministerial Conference 10+1 sessions held in Kuala Lumpur from 10th to 11 July. ASEAN welcomed the continued support from its dialogue partners in advancing regional efforts on climate action and environmental sustainability, which remain among the region's most pressing issues. The meetings also looked forward to enhanced cooperation in key areas such as green growth, transboundary haze pollution, water resources management and environmental education. In light of growing concerns over natural disasters, ASEAN underscored the importance of strengthened disaster management cooperation with its dialogue partners. The meetings welcome ongoing collaboration in key areas such as early warning systems, disaster prevention and mitigation, risk assessment and monitoring, response and recovery efforts. Stuttering Gaza ceasefire talks entered a second week, with mediators seeking to close the gap between Israel and Hamas. These indirect negotiations in Qatar appeared deadlocked after both sides blame the other for blocking a deal for the release of hostages and a 60-day ceasefire after 21 months of fighting. An official with knowledge of the talks said they are ongoing in Doha, saying that discussions are currently focused on the proposed maps for the deployment of Israeli forces within Gaza. The source added mediators are actively exploring innovative mechanisms to bridge the remaining gaps and maintain momentum in the negotiations. Hamas accused Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu, who wants to see the Palestinian group destroyed, of being the main obstacle. The group noted that Netanyahu is skilled at sabotaging one round of negotiations after another and is unwilling to reach any agreement. Netanyahu is under pressure to wrap up the war, with military casualties rising and with public frustration mounting at both the continued captivity of the hostages and a perceived lack of progress in the conflict. Iran said there would be no new nuclear talks with the US if they were conditioned on Tehran abandoning its uranium enrichment activities. Washington and Tehran had been engaged in several rounds of negotiations seeking to strike a deal on the Islamic Republic's nuclear program. But Israel derailed the talks when it launched a wave of surprise strikes on its regional nemesis, touching off 12 days of war. Since the end of the hostilities, both Iran and the US have signaled willingness to return to the table, though Tehran said it will not renounce its rights to the peaceful use of nuclear power. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said in a statement that Iran supports diplomacy and constructive engagement. He added Iran continues to believe that the window for diplomacy remains open and it will seriously pursue the peaceful path. However, Ali Velayati, an advisor to Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, said if the negotiations must be conditioned on stopping enrichment, such negotiations will not take place. The remarks came after Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baqai said Iran had not set a date for any meeting with the US. Syrian government forces were advancing towards the southern city of Sueda to quell deadly clashes between Druze fighters and Bedouin tribes. One Druze armed group said talks with authorities aimed at brokering a truce are underway. The violence began on Sunday when Bedouin gunmen abducted a Druze vegetable vendor, prompting retaliatory kidnappings. Though hostages were released later, the fighting continued yesterday outside Sueda city, with mortar fire hitting villages and dozens wounded. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights War Monitor reported 99 people killed since the fighting erupted on Sunday. Syrian forces yesterday took control of the Druze village of Al-Mazrah, where Bedouin fighters were also located. The Interior Ministry declared that army and internal security forces have moved closer to the center of Sueda province. As the violence escalated, Israel, which has previously warned it would intervene in Syria to protect the Druze, reported hitting several tanks heading towards Sueda. A spokesperson for the Men of Dignity movement, one of the largest Druze factions in Sueda, said talks are underway between the notables of the city of Sueda and representatives of the General Security Forces and the Defense Ministry to reach a solution. US President Donald Trump told Russia to end its Ukraine war within 50 days or face massive new economic sanctions as he laid out plans for new infusions of weaponry for Kyiv via NATO. Trump said he was very unhappy with Vladimir Putin, underlining his insistence that his patience had finally snapped with the Russian leader's refusal to end his conflict with Ukraine. During an Oval Office meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, Trump said if a deal is not reached within 50 days, Russia would face tariffs at about 100%. He said there would be secondary tariffs that target Russia's remaining trade partners, seeking to cripple Moscow's ability to survive already sweeping Western sanctions. Trump and Rutte also unveiled the deal under which the NATO military alliance would buy millions of dollars of arms from the US, including Patriot anti-missile batteries, and then send them to Ukraine.
Of course, the US will keep on its stockpiles necessary to defend this country. That's absolutely clear. But it will mean that Ukraine can get its hands on really massive numbers of military equipment, both for air defense, but also missiles, ammunition, etc., etc.
The NATO chief added that Germany, Canada, Denmark, Finland, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden and Britain are among the buyers helping Ukraine. On a related note, Germany said it would play a decisive role in the new deal struck between NATO and the US to supply Ukraine with weapons to fight Russia's invasion. After talks with US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said Berlin and Washington will take a decision about sending 2 US-made Patriot air defense systems to Kyiv within days or weeks. Germany has offered to buy US Patriot units to supply them to Ukraine, which has suffered some of the heaviest Russian attacks of the war over the past weeks. Pistorius said talks would continue at the working level to finalize the details, including the number of launchers and missiles that might be included in the agreement. He added, with a deal in place, the first Patriot unit could be sent to Ukraine within months. He, however, declined to comment on whether the talks also address offensive weapons for Kyiv. Pistorius also revealed that Berlin had sent a letter of request to Washington for the purchase of US Typhoon missile launchers, with a decision on whether to place an order to be taken later. He described the system as a potential stopgap solution, while European partners work to develop their own land-based long-range weapons. The EU has moved to firm up possible retaliation if US President Donald Trump hits the bloc with 30% tariffs, while insisting it is still looking to clinch a deal by 1st August. Trade Chief Maros Shevchovich said Brussels is putting forward a list of US goods worth 72 billion euros that could be targeted with levies if talks fail.
The EU, as you know very well, never walks away without genuine effort, especially considering the hard work invested, how close we find ourselves to making a deal, and the clear benefits of the negotiated solution. But as I have said before, it takes 2 hands to clap.
EU ministers roundly backed the push to try to salvage the talks, which Brussels believe were on the cusp of success last week, and to keep on trying to find an accord. But they also agreed to move ahead with readying a retaliation if Trump makes good on his threat. Brussels has been working on the list of US imports it could target since May, landing on the €72 billion package after lobbying from member states. The EU has already prepared a separate list of US imports worth €21 billion that it is ready to target over earlier tariffs from Trump on steel and aluminium. Still to come, 9 killed in a nursing home blaze. Stay with us.
Bersihkan penapis penghawa dingin dan tetapkan 24 darjah Celsius untuk lebih jimat.
And welcome back. India said China must resolve friction along their border, pull back troops and avoid restrictive trade measures to normalize the relationship between the two countries. India's Foreign Minister Subrahmanyam Jaishankar said this during a meeting with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi in Beijing on Monday. The two met during Jaishankar's first trip to the country since 2020, when a deadly border clash between their troops led to a 4-year military standoff and damaged ties until a thaw began in October, when they agreed to step back. Jaishankar told Wang that good progress made by the countries in the past 9 months for normalization of relations is a result of the resolution of friction along their border. India and China share a 3,800-kilometer long border that is poorly demarcated and has been disputed since the 1950s. They fought a brief but brutal border war in 1962, and talks over the decades to settle the border dispute have made slow progress. Last month, Indian Defence Minister Rajnath Singh told his Chinese counterpart that the two countries should seek a permanent solution to the border dispute, seen as a new push by New Delhi for a conclusive outcome. French President Emmanuel Macron welcomed his Indonesian counterpart Prabowo Subianto at the Elysee Palace in Paris on Monday. Subianto had been a guest at the Bastille Day parade in the French capital earlier in the day. An Indonesian marching band and soldiers also participated in the parade alongside French troops. The Indonesian contingent comprised 500 military and police officers and cadets from the Indonesian military and police academies. Indonesia wants to portray Prabowo's visit, which also included engagements with the European Union (EU) leaders, as the president's rising international profile. Meanwhile, France wants to capitalize on the visit to deepen the engagement with the country and lay groundwork for defense deals in the works. Indonesia has signed a deal to buy 42 French Rafales and 2 French submarines. France wants Indonesia, the largest Southeast Asian economy, to buy more as the country faces challenges from China. However, Indonesia is also seeking a middle ground of sorts in the confrontation with China. The leaders of Britain and the Czech Republic said on Monday they would work together to explore opportunities for small modular nuclear reactors, or SMRs, a partnership that could see Rolls-Royce's SMR business exports up to 6 units to the Central European country. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Czech Prime Minister Petr Fiala met at Downing Street in London and said they would discuss the initiative. Britain last month pledged £2.5 billion to build SMRs, which it hopes can help increase energy security and help the country meet its climate targets, while also creating export opportunities and jobs. Rolls-Royce was selected last month to build Britain's first SMRs. Britain's state-owned energy company, Great British Energy, is expected to sign a contract for the new plants and pick a site later this year, subject to regulatory approval. Czech's electricity producer, CEZ, last year said it would take a stake about 20% in Rolls-Royce's SMR business and plan to deploy up to 3 gigawatts of SMR plants in the country, equivalent to 6 units, with each unit capable of powering around 1 million homes. Starmer and Fiala will host a business roundtable as part of the Czech Premier's visit to London to drive closer trade and investment links between the two countries. The U.S. Supreme Court has cleared the way for President Donald Trump's administration to resume dismantling the Department of Education, part of his bid to shrink the federal government's role in education in favor of more control by the states. In the latest High Court win for Trump, the justices lifted a federal judge's order that had reinstated nearly 1,400 workers affected by mass layoffs at the department and blocked the administration from transferring key functions to other federal agencies. The court's action came in a brief, unsigned order, with its 3 liberal justices dissented. A legal challenge, however, is continuing to play out in lower courts. A group of 21 Democratic Attorney General, school districts and unions behind a pair of legal challenges had warned in court papers that Trump's shutdown efforts threaten to impair the department's ability to perform its core duties. Created by Congress in 1979, the Department of Education's main roles include administering college loans, tracking student achievement and enforcing civil rights in schools. It also provides federal funding for needy districts and to help students with disabilities. The U.S. Commerce Department has decided to impose duties of 17.09% on most fresh tomatoes from top supplier Mexico after withdrawing from a 2019 deal suspending an anti-dumping duty investigation. The US and Mexico first struck an agreement in 1996 to regulate Mexican tomato exports and allow US producers to compete fairly. The agreement was last renewed 6 years ago to avert an anti-dumping investigation and end a tariff dispute on the trade, which is worth more than $3 billion a year. The 2019 agreement was supposed to set a floor on pricing and provided for U.S. border inspections of crops. But U.S. growers have long argued that the arrangement had too many loopholes that allowed for dumping of Mexican fruits. The Commerce Department said anti-dumping duties are calculated to measure the percentage by which Mexican tomatoes have been sold in the U.S. at unfair prices. U.S. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick noted that for far too long, American farmers have been crushed by unfair trade practices that undercut pricing on produce such as tomatoes. President Donald Trump had separately threatened to impose a 30% tariff on imports from Mexico starting 1st August after weeks of negotiations with the major U.S. trading partner failed to reach a comprehensive trade deal. TikTok Chief Executive Officer CEO Shou Chew has requested an urgent in-person meeting with Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly to discuss the wind-up order imposed by Ottawa on the company's operations. The CEO warned that unless Joly intervened, TikTok would be forced to shut down operations in Canada. All locally hired staff would have to be fired, and the company would not only have to halt hundreds of millions in investments, but also its support to Canadian creators and culture. Shou argued in his letter that the decision to close TikTok Canada's offices across the country was made under a previous government and in different circumstances. That situation, he continued, no longer reflects current realities. In November, the government under former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau ordered the closure of TikTok's Canadian branch, TikTok Technology Canada, citing risks to the country's security. In early 2023, Ottawa had also banned the use of the social media app on all federally issued devices, arguing that it posed an unacceptable risk to privacy and security. A nighttime fire at a nursing home has left 9 people dead in the northeastern U.S. state of Massachusetts after a desperate rescue operation. According to Fall River Fire Chief Jeffrey Bacon, 1 person remains in critical condition, over 30 were taken to hospitals, and at least a dozen were saved in a rescue requiring ladders. The fire broke out at an assisted living facility in the city of Fall River, about 96 kilometers south of Boston. Local media aired footage of residents being taken away from the scene on stretchers. Around 70 people resided at the Gabriel house and some 50 firefighters were mobilized to fight the blaze. The fire department said firefighters who responded to the call saw heavy smoke and flames at the front of the building, with occupants trapped inside. They rescued numerous residents of the facility, which is designed for older people to live independently with staff assistance. 5 fighters who were injured in the blaze have already been released from the hospital. The origin and cause of the fire are being investigated. The city opened up a temporary shelter for surviving residents. Next in sports, Healy claims yellow jersey as Yates win 10th stage. Stay tuned.
Padamkan komputer untuk lebih penjimatan.
Ben Healy rode himself into the ground in a nail-biting finale to become the first Irishman in 38 years to wear the yellow jersey at the Tour de France, as Britain's Simon Yates claimed victory in Stage 10 on Monday with a perfectly timed attack. Giro dItalia champion Yates emerged from the day's breakaway to secure his 3rd career Tour stage win. Yates pulled away on the final climb to beat Tijmen Arensman of the Netherlands and Healy, who finished 2nd and 3rd respectively. Heading into the first rest day, Healy leads defending champion Tadej Pogačar by 29 seconds in the general classification after the Slovenian eased off on the final ascent. Belgian Remco Evenepoel sits 3rd, 1 minute further back, after losing 6 seconds in the closing kilometers when Pogačar briefly surged in an attempt to test Jonas Vingegaard, widely seen as his main rival for the overall title. Vingegaard stayed locked onto Pogačar's wheel and remains 1:17 behind the UAE Team Emirates leader. As Pogačar approached the finish, Healy smiled while watching the Slovenian on the giant screen. With Pogačar visibly backing off, the EF Education Easy Post rider crossed the line to become the first Irishman to lead the Tour since Stephen Roche won the race in 1987. Healy had looked one of the strongest riders in the breakaway on the 165.3-kilometer Healy route from Enazat. But Yates timed his move to perfection, attacking solo on the final climb to seal a tactical victory. And on to cricket. Mitchell Starc delivered the fastest 5-wicket haul in Test history on Monday as Australia crushed the West Indies by 176 runs in the 3rd Test in Kingston, Jamaica, to complete a 3-0 series sweep. Starc took 15 balls to wreck the West Indies' top orders in a brilliant display that left the home side's run chase in tatters before returning to take his 6th wicket after Scott Boland's hat-trick.
Welcome to highlights of the 3rd day of the
West Indies were bowled out for 27, the 2nd lowest total in Test history after New Zealand's 26 against England in 1955. The drama began on the first delivery of West Indies' 2nd innings, when Starc enticed John Campbell to nick an outswinger to wicketkeeper Josh Inglis. Debutant Kevlon Anderson shouldered arms to a ball that jagged back and struck his pad 4 balls later, before Brendan King edged onto his stumps, as the hosts found themselves 3 wickets down with no runs on the board. Starc then trapped Mikhail Lewis-Lake before wicket, or LBW, to become the 4th Australian to reach 400 Test wickets alongside Shane Warne, Glenn McGrath and Nathan Lyon. 2 balls later, he trapped Shai Hope LBW and he finished with figures of 6-9. At tea, the West Indies stood at a precarious 22-6, needing 182 runs for victory and staring down the barrel of cricket's ultimate embarrassment, with 5 runs needed to avoid the lowest ever total. Boland dismissed Justin Greaves, Shamar Joseph and Jomel Warrican to claim a hat-trick that left West Indies at 26-9 level with New Zealand's record. In the end, it was a narrow escape for the hosts as they added another run before Starc returned to bowl Jayden Seales. Britain's Oleg Polintsev and American Becca Pizzi secured victories in the summer edition of the North Pole Marathon. Held under sub-zero conditions at 90 degrees north, the event featured 91 runners from 22 countries battling -8 degrees Celsius temperatures, limited visibility and challenging terrain. Polintsev claimed the men's title with a time of 3 hours, 43 minutes and 25 seconds, while Pizzi broke the women's event record, finishing in 4 hours, 46 minutes and 26 seconds.
By far the hardest race I ever done, but I just put my head down and took 1 mile at a time and just tried to stay focused and in the zone and get it done. And here we are in the Arctic Ocean. It's just so beautiful. I feel so lucky to be here.
A 5-person team, including 2 septuagenarians, achieved a Guinness World Record for the fastest North Pole Marathon by a linked team, completing the race in 8 hours and 52 minutes. And finally, in football, former Real Madrid midfielder and Croatia captain Luka Modric arrived at Malpensa Airport on Monday ahead of his move to Setia side AC Milan. The 39-year-old announced in May that he would be leaving Madrid after the Club World Cup, bringing his 13-year spell at the Spanish Giants to a close. Last week, Milan coach Massimiliano Allegri said the 2018 Ballon d'Or winner would head to the San Siro from Real Madrid after the Club World Cup. Modric, who turns 40 in September, joined Madrid from Tottenham in 2012 and had been linked with a move to Italy since early June, after announcing he would leave the Spanish Giants at the end of his contract. Modric was in Milan early on Monday to undergo medical tests, but according to Italian media, will only start training with his teammates in August. Allegri is back at the helm at Milan, having led them to a Serie A title in 2011 during his first spell in charge between 2010 and 2014. Their first game of the new season is in the Italian Cup on 17 August. Elsewhere, Al Nassr appointed Portuguese Jorge Jesus as coach on Monday, 2 months after he left their bitter Saudi Pro League rivals Al Hilal. The 70-year-old won the domestic treble in his second stint with Riyadh-based Al Hilal in the 2023-24 season, but left the club in May after they lost in the AFC Champions League Elite semi-finals to Saudi Arabian side Al Ahly. The former Copa Libertadores winner with Brazil's Flamengo, who replaces Italian Stefano Pioli, has signed a 1-year contract with Al Nassr. 9-time Saudi champions Al Nassr have extended the contract of 40-year-old 5-time Ballon d'Or winner Cristiano Ronaldo until 2027. Ending today's bulletin with a recap of our top story. Trump wants Russia to end war in Ukraine or face massive sanctions. Do join us again tonight at 8:30 p.m. for more on TV1 and Solar Berita RTM. And in case you miss it, you can always stream us on RTM Click's website and mobile application. Till then, I'm Brendan Lepol. Malaysia Madani, Rakyat, Disantuni. Have a pleasant day. Take care.